Welcome to the skeletal system. We will be talking about the skeletal system for the next couple of weeks, and especially in lab. So, the skeletal system will include bones, cartilage, ligaments, and any related connective tissues. It will also include the joints of the body, where these bones will connect to each other. It functions in support and also protection of your vital organs. It stores calcium and phosphorus ions, some of your other minerals, and lipids in the form of yellow bone marrow. It helps with blood cell production because red bone marrow will help to create your red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. And it also helps with leverage because it changes the magnitude and direction of the forces applied by skeletal muscles. There are many different shapes of bones. We have sutural bones, which are also called wormian bones, and these are our flat bones of the skull that are separated by sutures. We have irregular bones, which form more complex shapes, things like the vertebrae. Short bones are more boxy, they have more equal dimensions. Think of things like our carpals and tarsals. Flat bones are things like that have thin, flattened shapes. Think of things like the sternum or the scapula. We have long bones that have specific parts, specifically shafts, and a medullary cavity. Things like our femurs, our tibia, fibula, and then we have sesamoid bones, called so because they resembled sesame seeds. Things like our patella. We have many bone markings, and these are separated by projections, openings, and depressions. These would be really good to know when you're looking for these structures in lab, so that you know kind of what to look for. Projections are where something typically attaches to bones, things like ligaments and tendons. So a process is something like a bump. A ramus makes an angle. A trochanter is large and rough. A crest is a prominent ridge. A spine is more pointed. A line is a low ridge. A tubercle is small and rounded. A tuberosity is rough, like our ischial tuberosity. A head is an expanded end of an epiphysis, like the femoral head. The neck is the connection between the epiphysis and the diaphysis. The facet is a small, flat, and articular surface, things like the inferior and superior facets of the vertebrae. Condyles are smooth, rounded, and also articular surfaces, like our occipital condyles. And the trochlea is small, grooved, and also articular. Some of our openings and depressions both are for blood vessels or nerves. Some of our openings are sinuses, which are typically chambers filled with air. We have some of those in our skull. A foramen is a round opening. A fissure is a deep furrow. A meatus is a passage or a channel. And a canal is a duct or channel. Some of our depressions are the sulcus, which is a narrow groove, and a fossa, which is a shallow depression. So let's talk about the structure of a long bone. The diaphysis is the shaft in the middle, so it's the longest part of the bone. The epiphysis is either end of the bone, and the metaphysis is in between the epiphysis and the diaphysis. So this will usually be the neck of the bone. Compact bone tends to have a medullary cavity down the center, which will contain red bone marrow that will produce all of our blood cells. Spongy bone will tend to be a little softer, and we'll talk about the differences in structure here in just a second. So, bone tissue. The matrix of the bone is dense because of these calcium salt deposits that are found within the bone. We will also find osteocytes or bone cells within lacunae. Between these lacunae, we will find canaliculi where they will communicate, and surrounding the entire bone will be this periosteum or fibrous sheath. So the matrix of the bone. what is the bone made of? 2/3 of the bone is made of calcium phosphate. It forms these hydroxyapatite crystals, which makes the bone very brittle but very hard. So 1/3 of the bone matrix are collagen fibers for strength. We have 4 different types of bone cells. We have osteogenic cells, also known as osteoprogenitor cells. These are stem cells that eventually differentiate into osteoblasts. They line the endosteum, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. It's going to line the medullary cavity. Osteogenic cells also help with repair of bone, especially through fractures. Skipping to osteoblasts, we'll come back to osteocytes in just a second. Osteoblasts make new bone. New bone is known as osteoid. Once osteoblasts are surrounded by this bony matrix of new bone that's surrounding them, they will turn into osteocytes. Osteocytes are mature bone cells. They cannot divide, and they make up a majority of your cellular population in bone. Osteoclasts are a little bit different than the rest. They lie in osteoclastic crypts, or house ships lacunae. They erode away bone through osteolysis, also known as resorption. Not reabsorption, but resorption. These are not related to osteogenic cells, so osteogenic cells cannot differentiate into osteoclasts. Because osteoclasts are going to resemble things more like the macrophages that help to break things down, engulf things. Which makes sense, because osteoclasts help to erode away bone. The functional unit of bone is the osteon, also known as a Haversian canal. So the osteon is this whole concentric ring. They run parallel to the long axis of bone, which is really important in giving the bone its compressive strength. So some bones can withstand 10 to 15 times their body weight in pressure along the long axis of bones. If they underwent a transverse force perpendicular to the axis of the bone, they could easily break. So that's why it's important that these osteons run parallel. These osteons have these central canals right down the center, or maybe a little off to the center, which contain the blood vessels that give the osteon its nutrients. There's also perforating canals throughout the osteon, also called Volkmann's canals. They run perpendicular to the surface of the osteon, and they help to supply blood to deeper osteons. We also have lamellae, which are the concentric rings. So there are interstitial lamellae that help to fill the spaces between osteons. And there are also circumferential lamellae found on the inner and outer surfaces of bones. And they'll be covered by periosteum or endosteum, and they're produced during bone growth. Osteocytes will make up the cellular components of these osteons, and they will be sitting within lacunae. So that was compact bone structure. In spongy bones, there's no osteons present. Spongy bones help to form trabeculae. Trabeculae is this meshwork of supporting fibers oriented along the stress lines of the bone, where the bone gets the most stress from your body. There are no capillaries or venules in the matrix of spongy bone. They're less dense than compact bone, and oftentimes they contain red bone marrow or yellow bone marrow. Red bone marrow will make blood cells. Yellow bone marrow will store energy as adipose tissue. Periosteum will surround bones and isolate them from surrounding tissues. It also provides a route for blood vessels and nerves, and it takes part in growth and repair. Periosteum is filled with sensory nerves, which is why when you break a bone, your bone itself cannot actually sense pain, but the periosteum can. So when you break a bone, you also break the periosteum, and that's what provides so much pain. Periosteum is continuous with the connective tissue near joints, and in synovial joints with the joint capsule itself. There are also these perforating or Sharpie's fibers that are continuous with the periosteum and the bone, so it's kind of like you sewed the periosteum into the bone in some places. The breaking of those Sharpie's fibers during fracture is what causes that pain. With shin splints, the periosteum lifting off of the tibia, that's what causes pain with shin splints. Endosteum will line the medullary cavity in the middle of long bones. The endosteum is active during bone repair, growth, and remodeling, and consists of a single layer of osteogenic cells. There are certain points in the endosteum where the cellular layer is incomplete, and those are exposed matrix sites. That's where osteoclasts and osteoblasts will live and be able to perform their functions. So we'll start here next week with the formation of the bony skeleton and how the bones will develop over time.